Do you love sports cars? Maybe you've got the money sitting around to buy something really nice. Something like a old used Ferrari or a Lamborghini. But you want something unique. You want something special. You want something iconic. And maybe that looks like they ran out of budget at the end of the design process. How about the Alfa Romeo SZ? It's that odd styling that we have to talk about before we dig too deeply into the driving impressions I got behind the wheel of the SZ. Just look at this car. It's immediately striking, isn't it? You know, it's rare to see a car that can blend both curves and sharp angles like the SC does here, and it pulls it off beautifully. At the front, we see that iconic Alfa Romeo triangular grille, and it's bookended by perhaps, for the time, one of the most daring sets of headlights ever. Remember when Alfa Romeo came out with the 4C more recently? Everyone hated those headlights. But in reality, it was a pretty honorable homage to this headlight design that was also hated at the time. Of course, it wasn't just the headlights that people disliked when the SZ arrived. The biggest problem was that people just didn't like the proportions of the car. It was pretty shocking for the time. But if you take a look at it and imagine what we all might think if this was released today, it doesn't seem that shocking or odd to look at all. Styling of the SZ was a collaboration between Alfa Romeo, their parent company Fiat, and Zagato. And ultimately, this car was intended to put Alfa back into the conversation when it came to high-performance sports cars. And really, that's exactly what it did. Notice the dark roof? That's actually made of lightweight aluminum. Then as we round the back here, you see that carbon fiber spoiler that perfectly matches the curt rear deck of the vehicle. Those bits and pieces are really the only exterior hints about how technologically advanced this car was for its time. The sharp angles are in part due to the computer-aided design that was used to maximize performance and diminish drag wherever possible on the SZ. Underneath the bodywork of this car lies a suspension that was initially developed for the Alfa Romeo 75 in the IMSA racing series. You'll find Koni adjustable hydraulic dampers that are actually still working on this model today. Next, look how close to the edges of the car that the wheels are. That location allows the SZ to handle more like a go-kart than any car of its day. And ultimately, handling is where this car truly comes into its own. But before we jump in and drive off, a couple more little notes about this car and the outside of it. These body panels are actually fiberglass reinforced plastic composites, which is why a few of these panel gaps are less than idyllic. But it did keep the weight down. And there are some really fascinating choices made out here. For example, take a look at that door handle. This could have looked like any other door handle on the planet, but leave it to the Italians to make sure that it was unique and mimicked the style of the rest of the car. Notice how it perfectly intersects with the belt line there, and it feels fantastic as it pops the door open and lets you get in. Next, if you've never seen the way the back of this car opens, you're probably thinking that it's a hatchback of some sort. Oh no, it has a trunk, but it is completely wacky. First, it opens backwards, which in all honesty is pretty practical, considering there's not much space back here. And it doesn't hold much more than bare necessities should you need to replace your spare tire. Maybe you could carry a few extra items back here, but I wouldn't put anything in there that I valued very much. That leads me to the back seat, where again, this almost seems practical. Rather than make the trunk like every other conventional trunk you've ever seen, they made this, the back seat area, the main storage area. And they included straps back here so that you could secure your luggage. To my knowledge, there was never even the option for adding some sort of child seat back here. It was specifically meant for storage and storage only. Of course, this is a driver-focused car, and you can see the evidence of it here in the center control stack that's turned directly towards the driver. You can also see it in these deep, luxurious leather seats that are incredibly good at holding you in, no matter how hard the turn is. Next up, let's take a quick look at the gauge cluster. On the left, we see the speedometer, which strangely goes all the way to 285 kilometers per hour, around 175 miles per hour, despite the fact that Alfa said this car couldn't go above 150. Then there's the tachometer on the right with its red line at 6,500 RPM, and in the middle, a clock. Maybe Alfa felt like SZ drivers were those who needed to be reminded of the time often for some reason. On the right, there are 4 more gauges: battery charge, oil pressure, coolant temp, and fuel gauge. Nothing too wild there, but it does get interesting just below that. First, notice that little diagram on the HVAC system panel? That's Alfa's way of telling you how to manually defrost your windshield. It's showing you where you need to put the dials in order to do this. There's no preset. They just guide you through the process of doing it yourself. Now below that, we see the stereo, which isn't particularly notable, but then there's this Harlequin Momo shift knob. Now you might have noticed the Harlequin steering wheel earlier. Rex Bennett, Lane Motor Museum's education director, tells me that the odd coloring here is a direct connection to the similarly colorful Benetton-sponsored Alfa Romeo F1 team of the 1980s. This steering wheel and shift knob are likely aftermarket tie-ins completed by the first owner of this SZ. In the center tunnel area here, we see the adjustable shock buttons on the left and right, the hazard light button, as well as the fog light button. And what's this? Another defroster button? In all of my research, I have yet to be able to figure out why this and the diagram shown just a minute ago exist in the same car. We may never know. Perhaps one of the coolest things about the SZ, though, is this little plaque here telling you which one of the just over 1,000 ever made it is. This one, of course, being number 160. Now, on to driving the SZ. So we're driving the Alfa Romeo SZ and getting used to the clutch is the first step. This little car was made in incredibly low numbers. It has about 200 horsepower from a 3-liter V6, about 180 foot-pounds of torque. But power is really not what this little car is about. This little car is all about cornering. And it's so good at that, in fact, that it can do it at over a G. In testing at the time of its release, it pulled 1.2 Gs consistently in a turn. Some others have actually measured it up to 1.4 Gs in a turn. This little car is all about handling performance. Something you notice right away about the SZ is this long, laid-back position you have in the car. It really stretches you out. I'm a pretty tall guy and have pretty long arms, and mine are all the way stretched out to reach the steering wheel to get the right positioning and proportions for my legs. 10 points for mirrors that are functional. You know, you drive some of these cars that I just don't fit very well in, and the mirrors are as pointless as they could possibly be. They might as well not even be on the car. This one, totally functional, works really good. Super comfortable in many ways. Having driven a lot of cars like the PGO, the TVR S2, this thing just feels far more focused. It feels intense. It has one job and it's really good at it. Alfa Romeo made just over 1,000 of these SZs, all of them with the same motor. This one with the 3-liter V6 makes just over 200 horsepower. But it's just not about that. This thing is all about handling on rails. Being able to corner at over 1.1 Gs is outstanding even today. And Alfa Romeo was doing it back in the early 90s. It's certainly not so fast that it shocks you, but it really feels like a weapon. The handling is just so lightning quick to react. You know, anybody can go out and spend $80,000 or $100,000 on an older Ferrari or a Lamborghini, but I promise you, show up to a Cars and Coffee in this thing, really just drive around. You're gonna get as much, if not far more attention. For someone with that kind of money who wants an exceptional driving experience, this is a connoisseur's choice. Really, you think about this thing, it just looks so wacky. It looks so strange, but it's still so aggressive in terms of, it's obvious that it's kind of a purpose-built, purpose-driven sports car. It's one of the wilder things Alfa has been able to do. When you look at the Giulia, the Stelvio, those are otherworldly cars, fantastic vehicles. But this was considerably crazier than those are. Those are arguably practical in many ways. So that was the Alfa Romeo SZ. It was by far the most exceptional handling car that I drove that day at Lane Motor Museum. And frankly, it should be, considering all the incredible technology packed into it. I want to thank the incredible duo at Gingerly Captured. If you're in the Southeast and need videography or photography, clearly they do an exceptional job. And of course, I also want to thank Lane Motor Museum, Rex Bennett, Jesse Clark, Jeff Lane. Without them, none of this would have been possible. And if you're in the Nashville area, there really is no better place to indulge your automotive enthusiasm. Thank you so much for watching. Let's see what it sounds like under a tunnel. Not nearly as shouty as that TVR was.